Hello and welcome to Diaspora Weekly. My name is Jermaine Nkrumah and you're watching Diaspora Network Television. She was heard around the world blazing on the floor of the British Parliament, speaking her passion, talking about Blacks issues, African issues, fairness to people of color. And that was her first speech in Parliament. We are joined today, we're blessed to be joined today by none other than Janet Bell Ribiero-Addy, UK Member of Parliament for Streatham. I don't live in London, I don't know much about UK politics, but when I saw you on the Parliament floor, speaking your mind, no holds barred, I'm like, whoa. Would you like to tell us about it? Was that your first speech on the floor?
Yes, that was my maiden speech, and I think that one of the main points of the maiden speech, everybody, is asked to speak a subject that they're passionate about. It's your introduction into the House, and I was very pleased to be able to speak on the issues that I did that day.
Wow. And so where do you draw that passion from?
Well, I've been very involved in campaigns since I started at university. Actually, I got quite involved in campaigning at university. One of the issues that came up for me was a friend of mine who I was starting the African Caribbean Society with, found himself in some trouble with the authorities in terms of immigration, and they were looking to deport him for a very spurious reason. I remember, going about and trying to get as much help from him as possible, and I suppose that kind of launched me into a number of different campaigns. At the time, we had a very big issue in that area with the British Nationality. The British National Party were a fascist party, and I remember them putting a leaflet through my door as a student saying that we're elected, they would make sure that no Black people were allowed to stand for election again. And that really, really, really bothered me. I've always been very passionate about equality, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm a British person. I may be Black, but I am British. I have rights in this country, and no one should have the right to tell me or anybody that looks like me that we can't play a role in this country and we can't be treated fairly.
So let's talk about that equality and fairness. Why do you think people of the BAME community, most of them seem to have accepted the faith as well? That's how it's always been. So why rock the boat? Do you think time has come to shake the bottle in a way that it's never been shaken before?
I think definitely. I think in a number of different parts of history, we've seen things change. We've seen movements rise. I think about in particular, just before I was born, the riots that happened in the UK over race relations, and many other times actually where issues have been sparked, and we've made a push forward for racial justice. But it just seems that every single point in time there have been things holding us back. We've got to a point now, in particular with the Black Lives Matter movement, where people just aren't willing to stand for it anymore. And I can see through the sustained campaigning that people will not stand for it anymore, and they're looking to make long-lasting change. I don't think that's something that will happen overnight, but certainly, I think at this point in time, people are not willing to accept that the BAME community in this country are not willing to accept what is people think or have thought in the past is our lot in life, that the colour of our skin means we're going to be treated in a certain way.
Okay, I was looking at the numbers. I think it's London or UK. I'm not sure which is which. The numbers were like 44.9% of Asian. In the United States as a whole, it's about 62%, with all other congregational minorities making up the rest. And so if it came down to voting, one person, one vote, it seemed like if people are voting for people who champion their interests, our numbers at the leadership, the minority numbers at the leadership, should be more than they are now. Why do you think it's not reflecting proportionally at the leadership when you look at the population numbers?
Well, I think those figures you had for the UK were probably for London.
Okay.
But I think part of the reason is because of the way so many BAME people are treated across the country, people don't feel invested in the democratic system. I think they feel that no matter what they do or no matter who they vote for, things are going to be the same. So people are very disenfranchised. You know, obviously I urge them not to be that way because we can change things. And I think that's important. So that is like, you know, the main problem. People aren't getting out to vote, but the black vote in this country, you know, aside from the fact that I actually make up something like 15 to 17% of the population, even with that, because of the way our voting system is, you know, the black vote in this country is very, very valuable, and we could swing any particular vote at any particular time if we voted in our numbers.
Okay, so how do we change the mindset from maybe collective desperation, if you would, where people feel like, well, no matter what I do, things will be the same? How do you empower people to truly believe that that vote can make a difference?
Well, I think it's about showing them, baby steps, really. I mean, if you've been involved in a system for you know, decades, essentially, and you've seen nothing change, it's very easy to become cynical. Especially if you're from a working class background, and it seems that no matter what you do to elevate yourself and your family, it's not working, and you know, the rich keep getting richer or the poor keep getting poorer, to put it that simply. So you see that, and it, you know, disenfranchises you. But I think it's showing people that things do change. Small things can change when you take action. So even if it's on a local level, even if you're campaigning for your local council specifically not to change an issue on a road, or even if we're seeing, you know, throughout the Black Lives Matter movement, people are forcing companies to change things about their companies a step at a time. Seeing all of that, I think, you know, points people in the direction of the fact that collectively, if you raise your collective voice, you can make a difference. But it's about making sure that people can see those things. I mean, one of the great things about social media and technology, well, for example, like this, I'm sitting in my living room in South London, and you're sitting in Accra, I believe. And we can connect like this, and through social media, people are able to see movements from across the world and be inspired by that. We just need that to be translated into actual votes, and just democratic for all.
Okay, so life as an MP, you've been an MP for less than a year. How's it been so far?
I would say it's probably been the strangest time to start a new job. I'm in what was elected in December, but you know, I'm in August now, so I'll call it 8. I spent probably more time outside of Parliament than I have physically outside of Parliament than I have inside of Parliament because of the coronavirus pandemic. And obviously the issues that I would have been dealing with normally, those are still there, but much of what I've done for the bulk of time, from their jobs to issues with their homes and their businesses and everything in between. So my experience as a new MP has let's say been overshadowed by that. And yeah, this probably isn't the most normal time, or probably definitely not what most new MPs would have seen as they've come into Parliament.
Okay, and so you came in as we began this conversation blazing, but most people who start their political career at that level, the conventional wisdom is play by the rules, make everybody comfortable with you so that you can grow faster. through the ranks. Is that part of the plan, or does that bother? Is that part of the calculation?
I think it's very, very important to let people know who you are. And you know, I think that the public generally does to politicians as well, because they do feel like they do much. They do feel like they play it too safe, and they you know, are very, very reserved about things, and that's why they don't trust them, because they're not very real. You know, I have respect for someone who I completely disagree with, who's willing to be honest about their viewpoint, than I do for someone that would hide their viewpoint, or, you know, be very softly about it, just for the basis on moving ahead. I think that creates a lot of distrust in politics, and I think you can definitely gain more respect if you just are who you are.
Okay. And who you are is an avowed socialist. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
I am a socialist, yes.
Very good. The socialist is socialism pragmatic in today's world?
I think
is it realistic?
The corona has. I think it is completely realistic. I think there are a lot of distorted views about socialism, that it's the only way that we can move forward. But actually, I think it's shown that it's those places that have put forward socialism that have progressed the most. When you think about all of the that governments across the world have had to institute to ensure that their countries survive the coronavirus, you've seen socialism in action. Probably not as much as I would like to, but definitely them taking on socialist policies. So you see that at the end of the day, this is what works, because when we're in a situation where you know, capitalism is ruling the rich, as I said, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, that doesn't help the majority of the country. It maintains the status quo. It creates a situation where the working classes can't really, you know, thrive and develop. And actually, if there's anything, particularly in this country, where we've had a situation where, you know, people have been under lockdown, a lot of people have had to stay at home, but those people that have been going out day in and day out, those public servants working in the NHS and in other key worker jobs, those have been the people, those working classes have been the ones that have kept our country afloat. And I don't think a capitalist system recognises them. And also another thing that people, you know, feel that socialism doesn't accept prosperity. That's not the case at all. I don't believe that. I think it's a system of making things more fair, saying that people shouldn't be, you know, entitled to be prosperous and you know, to enjoy the fruits of their labour, but a situation in which you're doing that to the demise of your fellow country person is absolute disgraceful. I don't think a way to live.
Right. And you see, I lived in the United States where the debate on healthcare, for example, the moment you mention the Canadian politicians are quick to wave that off and say, oh, that's socialism. That doesn't work. You have to wait. But when the pandemic came, I think between the United States and Canada, we've seen, based on the results, who really had the better healthcare system. Does that bolster your argument?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Boston. I mean, as a country, or as a government of a country, your most important job, or your first job, is to keep your citizens alive. And obviously the next one is to keep them safe whilst they're alive. And you can't keep them alive if you know, everybody doesn't have access to their most basic needs. And healthcare is that most basic need. As you said, rightfully, that's definitely been displayed through the coronavirus pandemic. And we've seen countries that you wouldn't have thought would be in such a terrible situation. I mean, the US, for all of their medical advancements, and look at how many people have died. Even the UK, for all of our medical advances, look at how many people have died. And you know, it's shocking to find, in comparison, a country like New Zealand that is economically similar and probably not even as high up on the OECD charts, has only had 20 people die, where we've had tens of thousands.
So how do you think these countries have handled COVID-19. In fact, the other day I was looking at one point, the top five, or shall I say the worst five countries, were United States, UK, I believe Iran, Brazil, and France. And four of them were run by right-wing, or shall I say right-leaning leaders. Only France was led by a left-leaning France. And so when you look at how the coronavirus has been handled, how do you think United States and the United Kingdom have fared compared to the rest of the world?
I think given their status and the respect for which they're given on an international stage in terms of advancement, they have done abysmally, absolutely abysmally. To have those levels of death at this particular stage from this pandemic is disgraceful. And I think those governments will face the consequences for that. And a lot of it, and pointing to the UK, has to do with privatization. So even for our most basic things, securing tests to test for coronavirus, and securing proper personal protective equipment for everyone to be using, those key workers to be using, all of those things were handled, and a lot of that was because they were handed over to private companies who were attempting to get the best deal, and so in some cases bought faulty equipment, millions of pounds of taxpayers' money wasted on faulty equipment, or millions of pounds spent when there was a really, really adequate delay. You would never expect anybody in the global south would never expect to hear in the UK that there was a shortage of aprons, and care workers were having liners as personal protective equipment.
Okay, see, death rates are one thing, but when you look at the infection rates, can't you also tie that into the fact that people in these countries cherish their freedom, and that when you want to curb those freedoms, they're going to resist? For example, if you try to lock them down, they're going to come out. They want to be free. They've been free forever, and now you're trying to keep them indoors. Could that have contributed to the explosion in the infection rates?
I mean, certainly that would have contributed to some extent, but I think the public generally understood what the seriousness of the matter was. The issue was that those governments wanted to protect the economy first. So actually, I speak to the UK situation, there are a lot of places that weren't locked down, or industries that weren't locked down, because the government understood that as soon as they said, maybe you have to close the pubs or the restaurants, they would have to put in place some sort of package. We're calling it furlough schemes here, to pay staff and to make sure those businesses don't go under. So there was a big delay in our lockdown, and I think that was essentially to save the government money, and that ended up losing lives.
Okay, let's talk about Black Lives Matter. What does it mean to you?
Well, I'm really, really infused by the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment. Obviously, it's one that's been around for some time. However, at this point in time, I can see it's a sustained protest. You see people going out every single week. In the US and some places, people are going out every single day. And I think as I said earlier, it speaks to a time where people aren't willing to take the treatment that they receive anymore. And I mean, you've seen instances where people are becoming better educated. That's not just Black people, it's white people becoming better educated about our country's colonial and past, the relationship with slavery, and understanding what privilege means and how this white privilege and how this impacts people. So, it's probably the most immense movement of modern times. And I think we're going to see a lot of change, but I suppose before that, we're going to see a lot of discomfort.
Yeah, but Black movements have been around for ages. And this, to my knowledge, I think this is the first time that I've seen non-Blacks participate in that movement at a higher level than I can remember. Why do you think the change? Is it a change of, are we really witnessing a true change of heart among non-Blacks?
I think so. I think so. It's going to take a long time, and that's not just for white people, for Black people as well. Over generations, in society, we've been taught to be undervalued, but also to undervalue us. So there's a lot of re-education that needs to take place for everybody, regardless of the colour of their skin. But I think people are coming to a realisation that, we cannot treat our fellow human beings that way. And I think people are also coming to the realisation that not being a bad person yourself, or someone who necessarily holds racist views themselves, doesn't mean that you're not complicit in racism. I think that's what's coming to the fore a lot more. I think in the past, so-called liberals have comforted themselves with the fact that they don't make racist comments themselves, and they don't do this or they don't do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not benefiting from the system. And if you're benefiting from the system and you know that it is wrong, you absolutely have to be a part of changing it.
As the national regulator of the communications industry in Ghana, the National Communications Authority seeks to ensure an environment that is safe and fair for consumers and service providers. NCA grants licenses and authorizations for operation of communication systems and services, develops guidelines to streamline communication activities, establish and monitor quality of service indicators for operators and service providers. NCA is in 8 regions: Accra, Tamale, Takoradi, Kumasi, Ho, Koforidua, Sunyani, and Bolgatanga. Do you have unresolved complaints with your service providers? Contact us on 0800110662, 0307011419 between the hours of 8 o'clock a.m. and 5 o'clock p.m. from Monday to Friday, or visit our website at www.nca.org.gh and follow the procedure for filing a complaint or submitting enquiry. National Communications Authority, communications for development.
We wake up every morning to different stories from politics, business, sports, and entertainment. These stories, one way or the other, affect our lifestyle and dealings with family, friends, and business associates. Your take on Diaspora Network Television gives you an opportunity to have your take on these pertinent issues via phone in and messages to our social media platforms, DNT Ghana on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If it's an important trending story, we will definitely talk about it. Your take with me, Yalsechi, on DNT.
Would you buy anything without first knowing exactly what the product was and how it could benefit you? Definitely not. Neither should you vote for your next member of parliament without knowing who they are and how they plan to solve your problems. Watch The Next MP only on Diaspora Network Television and find out the men and women who want to represent you in parliament. The Next MP only on DNT.
United States has had its first Black president. How far away are we from the first Black Prime Minister in the UK?
Oh gosh, who knows? I mean, some people think that Boris Johnson's going to have a very bad. Well, I think that's telling. I mean, the way he's handled the coronavirus, I'm not sure if the people of this country will forgive him. And people are touting that the next Prime Minister could be Rishi Sunak, who is of Indian heritage.
Okay, and Indian is not Black.
No, it's not. Indian is Black. I mean, there's a political phrasing for Black. So in this country, we've had our own civil rights movement, and we refer to people as politically Black, in that if you are not politically white,
politically Black, I like that.
Politically Black. So that's all people of color. I mean, obviously, we all experience racism differently. Those of us from Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Depending on whether we're immigrants or not, and how it's come about, we all experience racism differently. But that particular movement was recognizing that no matter how any of us experienced it, we should all be working together to challenge it. So when I speak to that, him being politically Black, but no, Indian is not African. or Caribbean. So when do we expect our first African or Caribbean Prime Minister? I could not tell you. Unfortunately, I think at times in this country, in the way things are discussed in politics, too often politicians pander to anti-immigrant rhetoric a lot in a hope to, divert attention from some terrible things they're doing as a government. And unfortunately, you cannot talk about immigration without talking about race. And so that causes a lot of issues about how people are perceived across the country. So whereas I think it could take some time, we don't.
Well, you certainly, politically, your future, it looks like the trajectory looks good. You're young, at 35, and you just got into parliament. And I'm sure the thought may have crossed your mind that, hey, other than I do the right things, who knows? I might find myself as the first Black woman prime minister in the UK.
Unfortunately, to some disappointment, I have no such aspiration. I think the most important thing is to no such. I have no such aspirations. I would say never say never because of sense of humor, but
what's tell me
at this point in time, colleagues, I wish
times. Okay. So let me hear. I got you. I heard you straight. I heard you right saying you have no such aspirations, but then you add that never say never. That seemed to me that the door is not completely closed.
I only say that because I remember I once told people that I would never stand to be a member of parliament, and now I am, and I don't want to tempt fate. So I've learned things. Never say never, because you might find yourself in a difficult situation, and
you got it.
Which I am in now. I mean, okay. I've been an MP for 8 months. It's challenging.
Okay, so now you've put never say never into context. Let's talk about Streatham district. Tell us about it. How passionate are you about the district?
And I've lived here my entire life. Streatham actually covers Brixton Hill, Clapham Common, Tulls Hill, as well as covering Streatham and a part of Balham as well. So yeah, I've been here my entire life. So it's very, very, very much my home. And I think there's much that needs to be done to improve the area and actually give the people that live in the area, the opportunities that they deserve. I think because of the particular that we come from, Lambeth, especially if you're coming up as a young person, you already face educational disadvantages, and people, I suppose, expect less from you, especially if you're from a working class background. I think it's really, really important to improve social mobility. I've been fortunate in some of the opportunities I have, and I want the young people that live in there to have exactly the same opportunities and to be able to be and become what they want to, and not have to accept a lot in life that's just handed down from them just because perhaps their socioeconomic circumstances or where they live.
What type of representation are you going to give your district that's different from your predecessor?
So it's never pleasant to degrade your predecessor, but I mean, the most important thing for me, as I said, is to represent them to the very best of my ability. I have a great team. We work very hard in terms of individual cases. Obviously, I get to do some fantastic this. I get to come on interviews and have some. At the end of the day, my primary role is to support individuals, contact a problem, capacity to support them, and that must come first before any sort of additional roles, which essentially for politicians bolster their profile. You do have to serve your community. I very much believe are my boss, and I have a job to deliver for them.
Very good. Let's talk about Windrush. That's another area of your passion, another passion area of yours. I have to admit that I didn't know much about it until I started reading about it recently. And what's unfair treatment? How does the British get away with what they did with the Windrush generation?
I mean, at the moment, they obviously continuously apologized about this situation. It's not resonated in terms of swiftness with which they've been given their proper citizenship, and actually the swiftness with which they've received compensation for what they've been through. What we have to remember is that when many of these individuals came to this country, they came as British subjects. They came and they were asked to come to help rebuild the country, and they were Caribbean come and help rebuild this country. They were invited here. They changed people's immigration status whilst they are in the country, which I think is completely unfair. You come in under a set of rules and then they're changed on you just because of where you may have come from, despite the fact that you paid taxes and you've worked in this country and contributed to this country, despite the fact that actually you're British. And I think another thing we have to realise is that it's not just people from the Caribbean that have been affected in countries. The reason why you have more from people from Ghana being affected or some other African countries is simply because of the day in which we were able to achieve independence. So they came here, Willie came as Ghanaians. However, there have been some Ghanaians caught up in the way, some Nigerians, Ugandans, Kenyans, people from India, Bangladesh, who have been caught up in situations as well, simply because they came for their country gained independence, and they came as subjects of the British Crown. And obviously, since that's happened,
so
people have been.
To me, go ahead.
I know people are.
Go ahead, please.
Please,
so I got it.
Oh. And it's good. People have worked in this country for decades. They've had children here. They've bought home. In all of that, being a functioning member of British society, people lost their jobs because they went into work and were told they were not British citizens. They lost their homes. Some of them were deported away from their families. Some were deported to countries they had never been to, or actually a country that they hadn't been to since they were 2 or 4 or like that. And so many maybe went home to bury a relative and weren't allowed to come back. And worse still, many have died waiting for justice because they are of an older generation. Those individuals. So a number have died. And, other than, the general illnesses that affect you as you get older, stress can have a large impact. So you imagine the impact on their health of all of those issues being brought on them, being made homeless. The absolute disgraceful idea of making a 70-year-old homeless, but that is what happened with the Windrush and finding people in immigration detention centres.
What's it going to take for Black people who have been wronged historically, perhaps more than any group of people, to receive discussion on reparation and compensation?
Well, I think it's going to take a mass movement, definitely. And, ever since I had issue of reparations and, those campaigns that have been raising this issue, the call has definitely amplified. It's amplified. It's definitely been amplified along with the Black Lives Matter movement. That's very, very, it's been very, very, people just understanding that, there may be issues, but actually the idea of reparations can start very, very small. People are claiming that they're unwilling to apologise because they don't want to hand over large sums of money, and anyway, who are they going to give the money to? There are a number of ways to make amends. And, as I've always said, the first one is to actually open your mouth and say that you are sorry, say that it was wrong, and to look at what you can do. So, for example, we had slavery, we had colonialism, and in what I call a neo-colonial era, we have a situation where a lot of countries are particularly Commonwealth countries, are chained in the shackles of debt. A form of reparations could be forgiving that debt. I mean, think about the British Museum, which is essentially an empire. There are museum have evolved extremely valuable. How about simply just giving these things back, showing that actually we are your equals, people that look like me, no matter where they come from, what are your equals, and you understand that what happened in the past is wrong, and you're willing to, take steps to make amends. I think particularly for a country like the UK, who has recently left the European Union, we have to realise that we can't hold our position over people for much longer. Africa is booming. I can see we're moving towards the Africa common market, just as the UK moves out of its common market, and that's going to make a massive difference in terms of African economies. And whilst our economy in the UK economies are rising up that ladder, clear that if countries, and it's not just the European countries, want to be considered, want to be looked at as partners and to be treated in a certain way, they're going to have to show some sort of Christian. They're going to have to show respect. And amongst our culture, respect is important and continuing as respected, I believe, in that root in racism. And people keep saying slavery has, and that we should get over. Think about the issue you mentioned about Zimbabwe. I think to myself, and actually what's happening in Kenya at the moment with the tea plantation workers, and the fact that the Kenyan government is now in a battle with companies like Unilever to get their land. These gained preceded any ownership. Well, not ownership. They took it over anything. Gave or sold these pieces of land that actually belong to now sovereign nations to private companies. And that has led to a lot of the situations we see now, where people are just being vastly exploited and being paid essentially slave wages on this now. And it's a horrible thing to see. Africa, in terms of our land, think of the resources from oil, bauxite, gold, diamonds, all of these things that are so valuable across the world. Africa is rich, and even some of the new emerging values. So, for example, Africa's had a tech boom, and I think all of those things are really crucial. So, Africa, and that and the respect that it deserves, or some countries will still find themselves in favor.
Okay, all right. So now the conversation is Africa. That's which, in fact, that was my next, and now you've led us in there. So on Africa, I want to by asking you very simple. I want you to take 100% and then divvy it up. How African are you versus how British are you as a person?
How African my house. I'm very proud of my African heritage, and I'm from Ghana. My family are Ghanaians from Accra, and heritage is part of me. But I am British, and not about divvying up this. Because I'm not even talking about my ethnicity in that. Well, in ethnicity, yes, I'm actually African, or if you break it up on one of those genetic scale, it works out slightly differently. But in terms of my nationality, who I am British. I remember when I was younger, I thought I was just like my parents, a Ghanaian living in Britain. But I remember on visiting Ghana, people quite promptly remind me that I was a British person visiting Ghana.
Because of the way you speak.
Oh, well, yeah, that definitely hasn't helped me getting a fair price from taxi drivers in Accra. No. But yes, I think that might be part of the...
So how often have you been in Ghana?
More recently, I go every Christmas, because my parents are now there. I mean, when I was younger, I used to a few years, 4 to 5 years, I think.
I want to talk about European influence in Africa. Is that satisfactory to you?
I mean, firstly, again, looking back in history, a lot of people talk about, well, now we're talking European. I mean, so much of history is distorted in terms of advantage is viewed at the moment in terms of, being in the global south and being less developed. But we remember that in terms of advancement, hundreds of years ago, had been more advanced and was actually contributing majorly to that the Greeks and eventually spread across the rest of the Western world. In terms of influence at the moment, I had touched on, in terms of what influential presence, that there's a lot of eagerness to privatize bits, and obviously that stemmed from colonialism. I was talking before about Unilever being given Kenyan lands after Kenyan independence. And that was definitely the case I would say in some cases in Ghana and in other African countries.
We wake up every morning to different stories from politics, business, sports, and entertainment. These stories, one way or the other, affect our lifestyle and dealings with family, friends, and business associates. Your take on Diaspora Network Television gives you an opportunity to have your take on these pertinent issues via phone in and messages to our social media platforms, DNT Ghana on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If it's an important trending story, we will definitely talk about it. Your take with me, Yalsichi, on DNT.
As the national regulator of the communications industry in Ghana, the National Communications Authority seeks to ensure an environment that is safe and fair for consumers and service providers. NCA grants licenses and authorizations for operation of communication systems and services, develops guidelines to streamline communication activities, establish and monitor quality of service indicators for operators and service providers. NCA is in 8 regions: Accra, Tamale, Takoradi, Kumasi, Ho, Koforidua, Sunyani, and Bolgatanga. Do you have unresolved complaints with your service providers? Contact us on 0800110662, 0307011419 between the hours of 8 o'clock a.m. and 5 o'clock p.m. from Monday to Friday, or visit our website at www.nca.org.gh and follow the procedure for filing a complaint or submitting enquiry. National Communications Authority, communications for development.
Would you buy anything without first knowing exactly what the product was and how it could benefit you? Definitely not. Neither should you vote for your next member of parliament without knowing who they are and how they plan to solve your problems. Watch The Next MP only on Diaspora Network Television and find out the men and women who want to represent you in parliament. The Next MP only on DNT.
Let me take you back to colonial times. I'm sure that during colonial times, if it's an all-white British Parliament debating about their operations in Africa, they were to do that freely and openly because everyone there had the British interest completely. And so it was more like an us versus them type of discussion. Now, when you look at the British Parliament, you have Africans represented there. So clearly, there cannot be such conversations happening on the floor of Parliament. Do you think that when it comes to United Kingdom's approach to handling Africa and the former colonies, are there going to be some discussions that would not be open to members of Parliament because some of you are in the House?
No, I certainly don't think that will be the case, because on accepting a seat in the House, accepting the seat in the House as a British person, you're accepting your seat in the House, and you swear allegiance to the crown. So I don't think that's going to be the case at all. And if anybody was to ever do that, there would be a complete outrage. I think it's important that different people who have different ethnic origins are represented in British Parliament, because Britain has had people from different ethnic origins there for a long time, actually perhaps longer than we even know. I mean, I don't know if you would have heard about there's a very old an old skeleton that had been found, and they call it the Cheddar Man. Now, originally they just assumed that this Cheddar Man was white, but actually after lots of analysis, it's been found that the oldest bones found on the British Isles from this Cheddar Man were actually a black man. And
okay.
That completely changes our whole idea about race and origins and who comes from where, because it's very much accepted that the people in the UK were or had always been white, and that's now not necessarily the case. I mean, as we know, race is a completely social construct anyway. But it's just definitely changed arguments about who wasn't it. I believe there were even some Romans who, on arrival to the UK, referred to the people on this island that I'm now on as having dark. Those ideas of origin, I think will change over years gone by. But I think the fact that different people who have different heritages, not nationalities, but different heritages represented in the House has made a difference. And I wouldn't feel, as a British person, I should be excluded from any debate that talks about Africa. But what it does mean is that there are hopefully people in the House that will speak more favourably of Africa and are more recognising the wrongs that have been done and the things that we should do to right it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what people are going to do. I mean, I think all the time.
When we take you, for example, on the one hand, before you enter Parliament, you swear allegiance to the crown. You're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also take your African heritage very seriously. At some point, the two are going to converge, where there's British interests and there's African interests. As an MP, how would you reconcile that quagmire?
I mean, I don't think that they have to be opposites at all. I don't have to think that they have to conflict at all. The idea, I think the idea that, and this, I think, a very capitalist idea that in order for one to do well, the other one has to do badly. It's not the case at all. So sometimes people talk about British interests in a way that, we have to be cracking down on people, or in some ways giving people a bad deal to ensure that we benefit. Why can't we all benefit? Why can't, when we're talking about British interests and African interests, why can't they be aligned in the best interests of both groups of people?
Well, that's the way to look at it, but historically, the Europeans they've never really looked at it from that perspective. They've always looked at it from their interests at the expense of the African interests. So do you think they will change now that? Do you think they will change now that Africans in the House of Parliament?
Well, I think it's changed the debate, but I think overall governments that don't realise that we live in a very global, we live in a very global age, that don't realise the importance of working with other countries and looking at the best interests of others as well as your own, those ones will very soon be left out in the cold. So I think it's definitely changed the debate, but I don't think that immediately we're all of a sudden going to stop looking at British interests as more important. I think it's wrong. The false economy is going to affect our trade deals as we're coming out of the European Union. But I think we may have to learn this sooner than we think, or it's very, very deep. Well, it's going to affect us very deeply.
Were you originally for or against Brexit?
I was against Brexit.
Brexit, okay. So I guess that answer, because when here in UK, the United Kingdom is pulling out of a union, and here in Africa, we just built enacted. What do you think about Pan-Africanism? Let me start with.
So I missed some of that, but I think firstly, I'm a big fan of Nkrumah. And I think it must be recognised that the idea of a common market was something that he conceptualised even before the European Union created their own. And there have been some issues with the European, and I'm not one that believes in throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think there could have been a better way to resolve these issues rather than us leaving. And I speak as the representative of the place in the UK. So Streatham voted overall was the constituency that voted the highest to remain within the EU. So the people that I represent are very, 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 very passionate about this issue, and reflected that in their vote. And I think it's amazing that after so many years, after that forward thinking from Nkrumah about a common market, that it's now being realised in Africa. And I think that it's a shame that whilst Africa are realising that the UK are pulling out, I think it's going to mean so much for improving individual economies across the continent, and it's going to make such a massive difference. Even within African countries, I think what one of the biggest issues was in terms of fighting colonialism, in particular neo-colonialism, has been that age-old divide and rule, or divide and conquer. And for far too long, Africans have allowed differences amongst them to be stirred up by different interests in the West, and that disunity has essentially led to conflicts that wouldn't perhaps have otherwise had happened. And I'm not saying that groups of people in Africa have never had disagreement. Tribalism is what it is. Tribalism has been an issue on this island, and we fought, the Scottish and the English fought each other for years. It's not an uncommon thing, but I think there's been a particular issue with stirring up uncertainty and stirring up disunity amongst different African groups. And I think with this common market, you have a chance to change that, and with all of Africa's resources, show what a powerhouse Africa can be when it works together.
Okay, let's spend the final minutes on African leadership. When you look on the continent, how would you characterize leadership in Africa? Let's start with who your favorite leader is, if you have one.
My favorite leader in Africa, let's say, who should I say? Past or present, or does it have to be present? Because if it was my favorite, it has to be present. I wouldn't necessarily be able to say. I think the president did a good job in terms of COVID, but I wouldn't like to just say him because I know him the best, and I suppose that's not fair to the other African leaders, especially as a politician coming from another country.
When you look on the continent, there are a lot of leaders who have been in power for decades. When you look at dictators, people who are president don't want to leave. They've been there for decades. And now when you look at Ivory Coast, he's going for the third time. Guinea, he's going for the third time illegally. When they come, they don't want to leave. And when you look at the bulk of them, they are in French-speaking countries. And I'm trying to see if that has anything to do with how France relates with her former colonies, is how United Kingdom relates with her former colonies.
I'm not entirely sure that's the case, but at the same time, I don't think, and whilst, you know, I would agree with many of the people in different African countries that obviously dictatorships are wrong. I support democracy and believe that people should be able to freely and fairly elect people, and that you shouldn't create a situation where people can stay in power for a long time. But I mean, European nations shouldn't really be one to criticise. The party system and the way it works here in the UK has meant that we can have people run for multiple terms as long as if their parties in the leadership, and the way in which we work in terms of the constituencies you win, and that making up your votes in the House, and whether or not the Prime Minister becomes the Prime Minister. Obviously, Boris Johnson won the general election in 2019, but before that, the amount of people that everywhere, and I suppose it's something that you need in terms of reform. But I don't think the way in which the different former colonial nations relate to their former colonies has necessarily had an impact on that. Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that at all. Unfortunately, it has had an impact on where I would say some Western nations do prop up dictators for their own benefits.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you. But before we go, Ghanaians are very proud of you. Ghanaians in Ghana and Ghanaians in the United Kingdom. Very proud of you. You came to Parliament and you're blazing, and I think you're going to be a very good representation of the African landscape. Africa is proud of you. You came to Parliament and you're blazing. What words of encouragement do you have for young women?
And I would say that too often in life, you know, because you're a woman, because the tone of your skin, because you're Black, people tell you, or even just infer that you cannot achieve certain things. That is absolutely false. Woman is one of the most powerful forces on this earth, most definitely, and with that you can achieve everything.
MP for Streatham, Madam Janet Ribiero-Addy. Thank you so much for speaking with DNT. And I want you to tell us, before you go, one thing about you that you can share that's not in the public domain. That will surprise people.
That's not in the public domain. That will surprise people. Oh, I can speak some German.
That's too easy.
That's too easy.
I really want to thank you for speaking with DNT. I hope this is not the last time. Okay, we'd love to have you back.
Thank you very much. Take care.